My name is Justine, and I have OCD. My first memory with OCD is really in my late teens when I became hyperfixated around the idea that I was responsible for the safety of others. This manifested really in obsessions around door locking, window locking, and fire. So checking stoves, checking ovens, making sure that they're off, having things not be too close to electrical outlets, that kind of thing. I was absolutely plagued by obsessions around the idea that I would, inadvertently allow someone to enter my home or my workplace or my school, who would then, harm someone that I loved, a coworker, or a complete stranger. And of course, OCD was never satisfied with my checking. I would check repeatedly to see that doors were locked. But I would come up with a million what ifs. What if I checked the door too vigorously and broke the lock? What if I didn't check diligently enough and it in fact hadn't latched? At the end of the day, I was really fixated on the idea that I was responsible for everyone else, their safety, and I was really plagued by thoughts of people being harmed and it being my fault. So I really felt tormented by these images, by these thoughts, and really without knowledge of what was going on for me, without knowledge of OCD, began engaging in these compulsive behaviors in an attempt to neutralize the thoughts. And of course, that never worked. When OCD really started impacting my life, it was interfering in my ability to engage in day-to-day behaviors and activities that I had previously. So simple activities such as driving a car, leaving my home to go to school or to work, leaving school or my workplace to go home. These activities, which used to be simple, were now laden with kind of agonizing thoughts and obsessions and compulsive behaviors, which took a long time to complete. It really started impacting my life because I was quote unquote high functioning individual with OCD. I was really excelling academically in university. I wanted to do well at my job, in my part-time job. And so I felt I needed to find a way to continue engaging in the compulsions, but to try to quiet the thoughts. And so that resulted in substance abuse, and in self-harm, in really an effort to quiet the thoughts, and to focus my brain activity, my thinking elsewhere, even for a short moment in time. Of course, that wasn't sustainable, and that wasn't treatment. And so I'm so grateful that eventually I found appropriate OCD treatment. By the time my symptoms were onset and the time I received appropriate treatment, it was actually only the span of a few months. Now, of course, those months were difficult. I did initially think perhaps I was just dealing with extreme anxiety, and did speak with a therapist, a general talk therapist, to try to work through my anxiety. Of course, that treatment wasn't appropriate for someone with OCD. I would later learn that I really required a mix of medication and evidence-based exposure and response prevention clinical therapy to address the disorder. I think a big part of the reason, though, why it didn't take me too long to get appropriate treatment was actually that my mother also experienced and lived with OCD, continues to live with OCD. My parents, though initially, of course, didn't recognize my symptoms as OCD because they manifested so differently from my mother's. She was primarily concerned with fears around contamination and engaged in compulsions associated with contamination OCD. But after a while, thank God, my parents did recognize that, in fact, this was the same disorder, or was likely the same disorder. And so they referred me to an OCD specializing clinic, actually the same one where my mom had received treatment some 20 years or so prior. And I was correctly diagnosed by a therapist and started engaging immediately in exposure and response prevention. And it really didn't take too long before I started seeing progress, before I started reclaiming elements of my life that I felt had been lost. Some more recent what ifs that have manifested in my life, they started manifesting in my late 20s, early 30s, were actually around more religious scrupulosity. So the idea of, have I offended God in some way? What if hell exists? What if I have inadvertently caused my family members to go to hell through my behaviors or my thoughts? They really dealt with these bigger questions around religiosity and morality. And yet the treatment was the same. It really was exposure and response prevention and acceptance and commitment therapy with a clinician to work through these fears. At the end of the day, it was an intolerance of uncertainty. And, OCD treatment teaches us that we need to learn to live with that uncertainty, regardless the theme or the subtype of OCD. What I want others to know about my experience with OCD is that OCD is a real disorder. It is agonizing. It is extremely difficult to live with. And it requires appropriate treatment, appropriate interventions. But ultimately, I want people to know that there is hope. If you're suffering with this intolerance of uncertainty, this hyper-responsibility, there are treatments available and they work. If you're willing to engage in therapies and evidence-based therapies with a trained clinician, there are brilliant clinicians out there who want to help you and who can help you. In the conversation around OCD, hope for me means hope to reclaim the beautiful life that you want to live. Hope for a future where you can have goals and ambitions and achieve them. Hope where you can access treatment that will, in many cases, be life-saving and allow you to lead the life you want to live, to engage in a life that is driven by values and not by your OCD. There is hope in finding a clinician who will help guide you through this process and who will, help you build skills so that you are resilient in the face of OCD moving forward. New research is critical to the world of OCD and helping those living with this disorder. Research allows us to determine the best evidence-based approaches for treatment, for early intervention and diagnosis of this disorder. At the end of the day, it's what allows us, people with OCD, to lead full, meaningful, purposeful lives. Lives that are governed not by this disorder, but by our values and the people that we want to be to our friends, to our family, to our colleagues, and to our communities. New research allows for innovations in both medicines and in clinical treatment interventions, two paths that are crucial for so many people suffering with this disorder.